Okay guys, so today we are going to do our last plant chapter out of Form 5, so you can do a little dance. We are looking at what is called plant responses, and it is roughly on page 191 of your book, so it's before the photosynthesis chapter. So I want you to take a look at this photo, please, and I want you to think about how is it that these plants are growing with a bent trunk. And this is something that is man-made, so why would it be done? So pause if you need to have a little think. So to answer the question, how did the plants get like this? Well, when these trees were very, very young, somebody just tied down their stem or branch onto the floor, and plants stems and plants shoots will always grow toward the light, so they will always want to grow up. So these plants then curved how they moved. Roots will always want to go down to toward gravity. So they tie them down, the plants change the way they grow, so they've now bent. Can you think about why somebody might have gone to the trouble of doing that in a wood? So it's actually a really, really, really clever thing. If you've ever tried to chop down a tree, it is very, very hard, or it's hard on your arms and your shoulders to hold your axe and to hit the tree with the axe and take it back out, and hit the tree with the axe and take it back out, because while you're doing that, gravity is pulling down on you, and that's why it's so physically demanding to do. By bending your tree here, it means that you're cutting your axe, essentially going down with gravity, which makes for a much easier life, and you only have to go against gravity on your upswing. So it is not as physically demanding as it would be if you were hitting a regular tree at this point. So it's really, really clever use of plant responses. Now, in this section of our lesson, we're going to look at external and internal factors which control plant growth. And we have seen these words before when we did the nervous system. So you have to realize that a stimulus brings about a response, and a response is caused by a stimulus. So they are both related to each other. So stimulus is something that causes a response in an organism, and a response is a reaction to a stimulus. So again, we've seen this when we did the nervous system. But plants are different. Do they have a nervous system that you are aware of? No, they don't. They have to work on the production of chemicals to decide how they're going to respond to their environment. So because they're depending on chemical production, it's going to be a much, much slower system. So when we did nervous system, because it's an electrical system, it's really, really fast. So plants will be much slower to respond, but they will respond. So for a plant to respond, it has to actually grow or change the direction in which it grows, and this will cause your plant to move, and it is going to be much slower than how animals would move in response to their environment. So we're going to look at, well, if you're in a lesson, we'd say, okay, decide how would plants respond to light, to day length, to gravity, to temperature, and what is it that a plant might produce in response to their external factors. So obviously we're not in lessons, so we have to go about it in just dissemination of information. So in terms of light intensity, we've just done something that was all about light intensity. So you should know by now that light is providing the energy for photosynthesis. That's pathways 1 and 2. And the whole point of photosynthesis is the production of glucose for growth. In terms of day length, so we're getting now to February. Days are already getting longer. We'll have an extra hour of daylight, I think, next week. Woohoo! So what does day length do for flowering plants? Well, plants are really, really clever. When the day length increases, they will start producing flowers. They will obviously, it has a role in fruit and seed formation. It has a role in dormancy, in leaf loss, in autumn, and in germination of some seeds. Now, dormancy is just for something we'll do in Form 6, but it's essentially a period of no growth when the embryo and the seed just doesn't grow, and it can be because conditions aren't right for germination. And we'll come to that in Form 6 in more detail. So other external factors are things like gravity, and we've just shown you in the earlier example, roots will always want to grow toward gravity and shoots will actually grow away from it. So it causes our roots to grow into the soil and it causes our shoots to grow away from gravity. And obviously there's other factors that are influencing which way your plants are going to grow. And we have done temperature, we've done it in enzymes now, so you should know every time the SEC are mentioning temperature, it's having to do with enzyme activity. So higher temperatures, you're going to get faster plant growth as long as it's below the optimum. So the external factors control the production of internal factors within your plant. So gravity, temperature, light, they will all dictate what your plant will do. There are other external factors and we'll talk about them in a little while. Now, this isn't on our course. I have to find it for you. But it is a very, very cool plant. So, turned down the sound. You may or may not have seen this plant before. So it is very cool. It is so sensitive that as soon as you touch it, it is going to fall away from you. Can you see why that might be an advantage to that particular plant? So in reality, if an animal would start eating this plant will protect itself by actually folding up or moving away very, very quickly. So in terms of a response, it's very, very fast for a plant and it is pretty cool. Okay, that this plant isn't on our course, but the response is, and we will talk about that at a later date. But it is a very cool plant response. So in terms of our internal factors, so plants produce chemicals called growth regulators in response to stimuli. Now they're usually producing them in the meristematic region of the plants. We've already done meristems, and M for meristem, M for mitosis. And you're going to see the production of these growth regulators in your root tips and your shoot tips, first and foremost. Now I'm going to play you a little swift that I found recently, and it's kind of good. So we have our growth of plants is produced by, they are equivalent to hormones, but hormones isn't quite the right word. They are growth regulators and they are going to cause growth in some way, and we will have a look at how. So we have this young shoot in its evenly lit greenhouse, and you should be able to describe what the shoot does as you look at it and what conditions do you think the crests in the photo have been grown in. So let's have a look. So evenly lit greenhouse, our shoot is growing toward the light, it's growing straight up, there's no deviation in it. Here, these guys are definitely growing straight up in our little crest seeds down at the bottom, but they're actually very, very yellow in colour. So actually when you get really tall little shoots like this and very pale yellow in colour, it means they've actually been grown in the dark. So while they're growing upright, because they're growing away from gravity, there's no light for them to grow though, but they know because gravity is the opposite way that the shoots need to go up. But the fact that they're very yellow says they've actually been grown in the dark. Now, the shoot grows because the cells get bigger, and it has to do with this growth regulator. So I'm going to mention the name here. The name is auxin. Auxin is kind of the end all and be all for plants. It both encourages growth and it also inhibits growth or stops growth. So this is just showing water moving into your vacuole by osmosis. We now have a turgid cell. Remember we did turgidity gives plant its strength. It pushes your cell membrane out against your cell wall. It's got a really large vacuole. It's really good for support, prevents non-woody plants from wilting. And auxin will have a role in that. Obviously we know that if high concentration of water somewhere versus low concentration somewhere else, then water has no choice but to move in. So now we're going to see the changes in the stem when auxin is present. So before auxin, we have little cells. They don't look particularly turgid. And after auxin, these cells now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are now bigger, taking up much more space. But the fact that they have absorbed all of that water means the cell is now bigger. And we know that the growth takes place in our meristems, so root tips and shoot tips. So here we're now looking at the tip of the cell. So this is our auxiliary bud, and it's going to divide by mitosis to make us new cells, and there's also going to be auxin production. So have a look and decide, is the auxin being produced evenly or unevenly? The process by which the auxin is moving through the plant cells, and what do you think the auxin will do for the plant growth? So it is not spread evenly. There is a slight difference in how it's growing, so then you're getting a slight curve in how your plant is growing. The process, so every time they mention process and we're talking about movement of stuff, it's either going to be diffusion, osmosis, or active transport. In this instance, it's going to be diffusion, and the growth will grow upright, but this top of our plant here will not be a flat line. It will always be curved because the auxin won't be spread evenly. Now we'll talk a little bit about this. We will keep this one for further on. Alrighty, so just a reminder, meristematic tissue is where plants do growth, and they grow by mitosis. So in my head, M for meristem, M for mitosis. And we've talked about when we did our plant structure, apical meristems, they're your root tips and your shoot tips, and if you leave the apical meristem intact, your plant will get taller. And we have then what are called lateral meristems or auxiliary meristems, and they are around the edges. So these guys here are your auxiliary meristems, and they are usually responsible for your plant going wider. Now, if we were in lesson, we would talk about these words. So I'd kind of give you some hints into it and what do they mean. So what is a tropism as far as a plant is concerned? And then we have 5 types that we do at Leaving Cert level. We have thigmotropism, chemotropism, hydrotropism, phototropism, and geotropism. And you need to have a positive example, so of one and a negative. So we will go back to our little this here. No, I don't want to resume, I don't want to restart, but it's going to do anyway. So here we go. So tropism is essentially a plant's response to some external stimulus. So here's our little plant. It's growing on a windowsill with most light coming from the right. So what happens to it? So the plant will actually bend toward the light. So the tropism is the plant's response. It's growing towards the light. And phototropism, photo just means light, so it's a plant's response to light. And this is a positive phototropism, because if the light is over here, then the plant is growing toward the light. So how does this help the plant? If it gets more light, it's better, it gets more photosynthesis, it's going to grow better. Now, again, we have the light shining from the right. We're probably not going to get into this in terms of notes, but I'm going to show it to you now anyway. So if we are to look at our cells, I'm not quite sure what it wants to show us. So here we have a small vacuole all arranged. Here we have no vacuole. But what they're saying is now there's a difference in the growth. So why is that? Why are they bending? And it has to do with our auxin production. And we will talk about that in a couple of lessons' time. So let's understand our words. We have this idea of a tropism, and okay, we'll get rid of the twee music. So this is just showing you a plant's response. So the roots grow toward gravity. That's always the case. The shoots will know where light is and know to grow against gravity. So they will always grow upwards. So when you plant a seed, that is going to be its first response. So this is one of the things they do on the space station, is they grow plants and see how they grow in a scenario where there actually is now no gravity. What happens to it? So in terms of our definition, tropism is a change in the growth of a plant in response to an external stimulus, is the posh way of saying it. So it's what does a plant do if there's light, if there's water, if there's other weird and wonderful things around it, how does it respond? So a positive tropism will always grow towards this stimulus. So if it's a phototropism, it'll grow toward the light, and if it's a negative tropism, it'll grow away from the light. So here are little tomato plants, and you can see that they look like they are moving, and the reason they're doing that is because they're following the sun as it moves across the sky, and they're obviously in a greenhouse. So for my golfers, this is why no game of golf is the same. So if you go and play 2 rounds in the same day, you will play a different course, because the position of the sun will be different, and therefore the position of the grass will be different. And that's just for starters. Okay, so phototropism is a change in growth of a plant in response to light, and usually the light is only coming from one direction, and it allows plants to get as much light as possible for photosynthesis and glucose production. So what are our advantages, our positive examples then, So positive is your stem grows toward light, and your negative would be your roots will actually grow away from light. So at the bottom of it's page 192 in my book, you have this scenario, and we have these boxes in school. So can you think how this might work to demonstrate phototropism? So here we have cress seeds with the window at the side. Here we have cress seeds with the window will be at the top, and here we have cress seeds and there's no window. So I think I've called them room A, room B, and room C in your table. So what do you think would happen in room A if we were to actually let it go out? Well, the seedlings will be green, and they will be bent toward the window, towards the light, towards the window. The seedlings in room A will also be green, and they will grow straight upwards toward the light, so they'll be nice and tall. And room C, the seedlings will be yellow and straggly, but they will be upright, because they will know to grow towards away from gravity. So while there's no light there, they will grow upwards, so they will have grown up. So that is phototropism. Our next one then is this thing called geotropism. And here we go. So what these are seeds that were germinated. They're growing in a kind of an agar, so they've got water and everything they need, and they were left to germinate initially. And you can see now in this one that the root is starting to grow downwards, and the shoot is starting to grow upwards. Not a great experiment in terms of only one of their 4 seeds germinated, but gravity will always, always, always be a winner. It'll help the seed to know which way to grow. It is just gravity. Okay, so they can actually twist this box again, and they can get the root to change direction. In that way it's not just gravity. That is true, because there's other tropisms that we have to talk about. So I apologize for that. Okay, so that is geotropism. So it is change in the growth of a plant in response to gravity. So we can see our definitions are all starting with this, and it's just figuring out what this front part of the words mean. So a positive geotropism is when your roots grow toward gravity, and a negative geotropism is when your shoots grow away from gravity. So what's the advantage of a geotropism? Well, when the seed germinates, it's the root that goes into the ground first, so it's going to access all of the minerals and water that the plant needs. And it also is going to help in terms of anchoring them to the ground. The fact then that your stems will grow away from gravity means they're growing toward the light, so now you're going to have better photosynthesis production, more food for your plant. There's this demonstration that you can do. So this is where you take your potting compost, you put your seeds between the glass and the blotting paper, and you put your seeds in all types of different directions against that glass. And what will always happen is the roots will always grow down no matter what direction the seed is in, and your shoots will always grow up, doesn't matter what direction your seeds are in. So roots grow towards gravity, shoots will grow away from gravity. Shoots will obviously be growing toward light, but they will maintain this as long as gravity is present. So now we have Thigmotropism. I'm going to go in here to find you this one. So this is a time lapse. So you were seeing these plants. This could be sweet pea. They're growing. They're moving because light is changing for this. But what you will also see is that once they actually find something to hold on to, they will start growing up it. So vines, ivy work on Thigmotropism, and it's pretty cool as a concept. So tomatoes will do it to some degree. You can make them grow up vines if you have them in a greenhouse, and you tie string to your ceiling and your floor, and they will follow.
If you're trying to lose belly fat, stop doing cardio. Okay. This sounds bad.
We're stopping doing cardio. Alrighty, so Thigmotropism is a change in growth of a plant in response to touch, which is kind of cool. And positive is the tendrils will grow on the plant and they'll climb up your plant. And obviously if you are doing that, then you are growing toward more light for photosynthesis. So that is an example of a positive Thigmotropism. So we've only two more left. We have Hydrotropism. So hopefully you figured out what that is. That is in response to water. And you will find that roots will grow toward water, but there are these things called pollen tubes. So this, you can see them here in the blue. This is plant sex essentially. We're on the way to fertilization in the ovule. The pollen lands on top of a thing called your stigma, and it literally has two nuclei in there, and one of those nuclei is capable of making a pollen tube, and it knows which direction to go because it can sense where water is down. So that is very cool. You can do again an example where clay pot filled with water, plant your seeds, and you will be able to see that the roots will actually grow toward the water that's leaking out of through the clay pot. Kind of cool. So chemotropism is the last one. Kind of does what it says in the tin. It is changing growth in response to chemicals that are in your soil. So positive chemotropism is they'll grow toward minerals in your soil. The pollen tubes, as well as detecting the water, they also grow to chemicals released in the ovule. And negative chemotropism is if you have heavy metals or acids or something horrible in the soil, the roots will actually try and grow away from it to protect themselves, which is kind of clever. Okay, so that brings us to the end of chemotropisms and the first part of this lesson.